Modern workers are confused by Lao Tzu for one reason. They were trained to believe success comes from force, more pressure, more control, more urgency. Lao Tzu says that is often exactly why people fail. Here are 7 Taoist rules that feel wrong at first, but explain why so many workers stay exhausted. You were taught that progress is the result of pushing harder, that if something is not working, the solution is more effort, more pressure, more control, more meetings, more planning, more urgency. And on the surface, that seems logical. It feels productive. It feels responsible. But Taoist thinking introduces a dangerous idea for modern workers. Forcing outcomes often creates failure in the first place. That is where the confusion begins. And that leads to the first life-changing rule. Rule 1. Forcing creates friction. Because when you hear stop forcing, it doesn't sound strategic. It sounds passive. It sounds like the opposite of ambition. But this interpretation is misleading. Taoism is not against action. It is against unnecessary friction. It does not reject effort. It questions misaligned effort. And most modern workers have never been trained to see the difference. Rule 2. Effort is not the same as aligned effort. At the center of Taoist philosophy is a concept often described as effortless action. Not in the sense of doing nothing, but in the sense of acting in alignment with how things naturally unfold. Acting without internal resistance. Acting without excess force. Acting with clarity instead of pressure. But in a system that rewards visible effort, this kind of thinking feels almost invisible, even suspicious. This creates the first major misunderstanding. People assume that not forcing means not working. But what Taoism actually suggests is far more precise. It suggests that forcing creates resistance, and resistance reduces effectiveness. When you push too hard against reality, you don't accelerate progress, you distort it. You create inefficiencies that require even more effort to maintain. Modern workers are conditioned to believe the opposite. They believe that pressure equals progress. So when they encounter Taoist ideas, it creates an internal conflict. Part of them recognizes that constant pressure is exhausting and unsustainable. But another part fears that reducing pressure will lead to failure. And that tension keeps them stuck. Now here is where it gets deeper. Taoism does not just challenge how you work. It challenges how you think about control. Modern work culture is built on the assumption that everything can be controlled. Your schedule, your output, your results, your career path. Control is treated as a form of security. But Taoist thinking quietly dismantles this belief. Rule 3. Control is more fragile than flexibility. It suggests that control is limited. That outcomes are influenced by factors beyond your awareness. That the more rigidly you try to control everything, the more fragile your system becomes. This idea is deeply uncomfortable for most professionals because control feels like safety. Letting go of control feels like risk. But Taoism reverses that perspective. It suggests that rigidity is the real risk. Because when conditions change, rigid systems break. Flexible systems adapt. And most modern workers are not trained for flexibility. They are trained for execution. They are trained to follow plans, not to move with uncertainty. This creates another layer of confusion. Because the skills that help you succeed in stable environments can become liabilities in dynamic ones. The more tightly you hold on to control, the harder it becomes to adjust when things shift. And in fast-moving industries, things are always shifting. There is another aspect that makes Taoism difficult to understand. It values simplicity in a world that rewards complexity. In many professional environments, complexity is mistaken for intelligence. The more detailed your system, the more structured your process, the more serious your work appears. But Taoist thinking moves in the opposite direction. Rule 4. Simplicity is not weakness. It is precision. It asks what is essential, what actually matters, what can be removed without losing effectiveness. Because complexity often hides inefficiency, and simplicity often reveals truth. But when something is simple, it feels incomplete. It feels like something is missing. In reality, it may just be clear. Here is the question that exposes the whole problem. Why do some people seem to move effortlessly through their careers while others struggle despite working harder? From a Taoist perspective, the answer is not effort. It is alignment. Some people are aligned with their strengths, their environment, and the timing of their actions. Others are constantly pushing against mismatches they don't fully understand. And here's the uncomfortable part. Effort cannot fix misalignment. You can work twice as hard in the wrong direction and still fall behind someone who is moving in the right direction with less effort. Quick question. Where in your life are you forcing instead of aligning? Write it in the comments. This idea challenges one of the core beliefs of modern work culture, that effort alone determines outcomes. That is why Taoist thinking feels unfair to many people, because it suggests that success is not just about how much you do, but how naturally your actions fit the situation. And that requires a level of awareness most people have never developed. Rule 5. Alignment beats effort. Another reason Taoism confuses modern workers is its relationship with ambition. Modern systems glorify ambition. Bigger goals, faster growth, constant expansion. But Taoist philosophy approaches ambition differently. It does not reject ambition, it questions attachment to outcomes. Attachment creates tension. Tension affects judgment, and poor judgment leads to bad decisions. Taoism suggests that you should act fully, but without clinging to the result. For someone trained in performance-driven environments, this feels almost impossible, because your identity is often tied to outcomes. Rule 6. Attachment to outcomes destroys clarity. When you need specific results, you force actions that don't fit reality. As long as your value is measured by results, your progress is tracked through achievement. So when you are told to loosen your attachment to outcomes, it feels like losing control. But Taoism is not asking you to care less. It is asking you to act more clearly, to separate action from emotional dependence on results. There is also a structural difference in how Taoism approaches thinking itself. Modern work favors linear thinking, clear steps, predictable outcomes, defined processes. But Taoist philosophy operates in paradox. It presents ideas that seem contradictory on the surface. Act by not forcing, lead by not controlling, achieve by letting go. These ideas are not meant to confuse, they are meant to break rigid thinking patterns. Because reality is not linear, it is dynamic, complex, and often unpredictable. But modern workers are trained to expect clarity. So when they encounter paradox, they resist it instead of exploring it. This resistance limits understanding, because some of the most effective ways of thinking do not fit into simple frameworks. They require flexibility. They require holding two opposing ideas at once, and that is uncomfortable for minds trained in structure. This is when rule number 7 comes into play. Rule 7. Paradox is not confusion. It is a higher form of clarity. There is a deeper psychological factor at play. Taoism reduces the role of ego. Modern work often amplifies it. Recognition, status, personal branding. These elements shape how people behave. But ego distorts perception. It turns decisions into reactions. It shifts focus from effectiveness to validation. When ego is involved, you defend positions instead of questioning them. You seek approval instead of truth. You act to be seen instead of to be effective. And while this may produce short-term rewards, it creates long-term inefficiency. Taoist thinking operates on a longer time horizon. It prioritizes clarity over validation, effectiveness over appearance. And that creates another mismatch with modern systems, which often reward immediate results. Now bring this back to something practical. Why are so many productive people exhausted? They do not look busy, but they become effective. They do not look aggressive, but they become impactful. And over time, they develop a quiet advantage. Because in a world that rewards visible effort, invisible alignment is rare. And rarity, in the long run, is what creates leverage. Which rule challenged you the most? Comment the number below. Like this video if you are done confusing pressure with progress. Subscribe for more philosophy that actually works in modern life.